everybody can agree, right, that if there was a drug which was $1 billion a dose, and 1 million people needed it, and we knew that everyone who got it would have a really good chance of a much longer life, we couldn't afford that. And if it was free, we'd all get it.
There you go.
So who's going to draw the line? Is it the practitioner? Is it the payer? Who's got the hand on the throttle here?
I can tell you if all those results that you said came out the way they did, prescribing would go way up. Just as you mentioned earlier with statins, we saw the population expand for who they were indicated for. Prescribing went way up. Cost has also come way down. But you know, if all of those events are reduced and we see that, prescribing is going to go up because they care about their individual patients.
I guess if enough people want it, the cost per dose might drop, right? Or they'll go generic or something. But if we had incontrovertible evidence that they saved lives, it's going to be tough to say no, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the oncology model. You get an extra 2 months for $150,000 a year, we can't say no to that. But again, that might be a handful of patients rather than thousands of patients. So, I mean, we can spend hours probably talking about the societal impact and the fact that we spend more in this country on healthcare than any other country. Every other country has single payer systems and there's cost controls and they make coverage determinations based on quality of life here, et cetera, et cetera. Here it's free market, right? So we pay way more for drugs here. There are no price controls. We have trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars in unfunded debt. At some point, it's going to be a problem.
At some point, the tank is empty.
So who's going to manage that? And right now, I don't know how to answer that other than saying payers.
Right.
You know, CMS, government, yes, there's pros and cons to that. I don't know. But
So
if it's not
you've
managed,
taken on
if it's
the
not
voluntary
managed,
role of being that bad guy.
I don't, well, you know, I think we do a lot of dirty work, and I
Okay.
think we're cast as the bad guys in a lot of
Is
cases.
it fair to say that because you take all that on your shoulders, he gets to sit before the patient and say, "I'd love to give you this drug, but he won't let me."
Well,
That's not fair.
I would,
Absolutely
I think it's
happens.
changing. To Jennifer's point earlier, it is changing with deductibles and coinsurance and ACOs, and you know we're spreading risk around a little bit. But end of the day, it's better now than it used to be. But I would challenge that if you ask a lot of doctors that are potentially prescribing some of these medications how much they cost, I don't know if they could tell you.
Well, okay, let's do this then. Take money off the table, just for a moment. I know we can't, but let's just take it off the table.
If you do, these should be prescribed for anybody with elevated cholesterol.
There you go. Now, in
But
your
it's not
view,
that
as a
simple.
prescriber,
Not that simple.
do your patients have appropriate, and appropriate is a fuzzy word here, it may be that they have to be on a statin first and all this other. Do they have appropriate access to these drugs? Or are you angered?
Currently,
Currently.
I'm angered because I can't get I'm angered, not angered would be too strong of a word. I'm frustrated because it's just in a setting to be able to prescribe that drug for a patient, it's difficult. And it deters actually prescribing that drug for that medication, so we tend to not do it. We tend to do other things.
All right.
The data that just came out made me a little more frustrated because the data is even more proven. I'm understanding in the worst situation where I can't get that drug approved for a patient. In situations where they're easily approved, it's not a problem.
Is it splitting hairs when you talk about this data? Is it saying, this was a specific study, they were all on statins, and it was only 2 years, and this and that, but
That's right.
doesn't your gut tell you that
Yes.
it's a pretty good drugs?
Here's, I'm not telling any secrets. The answer is we practice evidence-based medicine because of cost. To your point earlier, if you took cost off the table, managed care wouldn't even exist. So again, it's unfair to talk about efficacy and safety without talking about cost.
Fair enough. That's a fair enough comment. But what I'm also asking is, isn't it a bit disingenuous to use the research that's out there, because it's fairly limited, and say, look, until you get more studies, until you get the people off the statins, until you get this, that.
My pushback though is it the payer's responsibility to fund that data? We're not setting the price of the drug and we're not doing the clinical trials. So all we're asking, no, I mean, we're basing our decisions on what we have because of the financial implications.
Okay.
So give us the data, we'll respond to that. I don't think it's necessarily our job to fund that.
But I think you are seeing the manufacturer community step up and look at value-based risk share contracting. I mean,
What does
we've
that
been seeing
mean?
in this.
What does that word salad even
Yeah,
mean?
risk sharing.
What
you
does
know?
risk share contracting
Oh,
mean?
so there we go.
Yeah.
So you
What
want
does
to
it mean?
So we've been dealing with outcome-based contracts for years, and what that means is you get an extra a couple rebate points for doing a whole bunch of extra work. I've yet to see a risk-based contract.
What
where
is a risk-based?
So it's semantics, but a risk-based contract would be if the drug doesn't work, then the pharmaceutical company's either paying for part of that drug or they're paying for part of the event. They're not doing that. The other issue is how operationalizable they are. So how do we measure this in something like this? We have an LDL, but outside of that, how do we measure, if a patient is on one of these drugs and they go in and have a stroke, with all the other things going on with that, how do we get to the point with the pharmaceutical company that we're agreeing that they're at risk for that? That's
Well,
been,
with a disease state like coronary artery disease, where are you catching them in a continuum? I mean, are you catching them when they first start developing atherosclerotic disease, or are you catching them, 2 years away from an MI, and whether you're going to be able to make as much of a difference?
so my point is, that's a great concept. I love it. We've been talking about it. We'd love to figure it out. But the two biggest barriers are we don't know how to operationalize them because we don't know how to define what an outcome is.
Okay.
When it's subjective or not measurable, when you don't have a lab. And even if you have a lab, then as a PBM, I'm going to get a lab? No. And then two is it risk or is it a small extra rebate? And if they're willing to go at risk, then we'll have different conversations.